Let's cross live to our studios in Lagos and speak to economist and Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Asset Management, Johnson Chukwu. Good to see you and thanks for your time. Let's quickly delve into this. As a financial expert, what's your assessment first of NNPC's reported 3.297 trillion net profit for 2023? How significant is this 28% increase from the previous year?
Well, let me start by saying thank you, Suleiman, for having me. When I saw the figure, I was quite elated. I was quite impressed. You know why? Everything we've heard in the recent past, we are all negatives about the Nigerian oil industry, what is going on and that. And then today, we're looking at NNPC had turned the corner. If you cast your mind back just a few years ago, 2018, that company made a loss of 803 billion naira. In 2019, you can say it virtually broke even by making a loss of only 1.7 billion naira. But today, we're talking about 3.3 trillion naira profit. And that is after tax payment of 2.6 trillion naira. And we need to put it in context. The NNPC is going to pay to the Federation account, to Federal Inland Revenue Service, 2.6 trillion naira as tax before it arrived at the 3.3 trillion naira. So that means that at the minimum, the company has created value for the nation in the region of 5.3 trillion naira. And if you also recognize the fact that total amount shared by the three tiers of government in the first 7 months of this year was only about 8.3 trillion naira. And NNPC is contributing as tax payment 2.6 trillion naira, which is almost 30% of the total amount has been shared. I mean, if that amount had been paid. I'm not even talking of the dividend. The dividend declaration of 0.5 trillion naira as interim dividend at 2.1 trillion naira as final dividend gives another contribution to the national economy about 2.6 trillion naira. So in effect, if you sum up those two, you're going to talk of a company that had generated into the national treasury about 5.3 trillion naira in a single financial year. And like I said, audits, our concerns have always been, when will NNPC be, initially it was when will it be self-accounting, it was when are we going to have transparency in its reporting, like we talk of other national oil companies like Aramco, and then we're now seeing, now we're seeing a company that's giving us a transparent report. In fact, one of the things that interested me, Suleiman, when I saw that report is that the base we've had about the amount of resources that have been borrowed with accrued in terms of crude commitment was also published. They didn't need to publish that, but they also wanted to show us that level of transparency. And then when I did the figures, total amount of crude commitment is about 221,000 barrels a day. So we now know where we are. We now know exactly what is our free crude. And so when we're making some of the debates about what's available to give to this person or that, we now know clearly where exactly what do we have, because NNPC is basically the treasurer of the country. They generate virtually 90% of foreign exchange earnings. Beyond foreign exchange earnings in terms of crude oil export, we're also talking of naira tax payment to the federal government. And I must tell you that I was positively surprised to see those figures.
Well, I'm quite sure some other experts like yourself are also surprised. You spoke about the dividend, 2.1 trillion naira dividend. Let's talk more on this before we move on. How might this impact Nigeria's fiscal situation, especially given current economic challenges?
You know, I did mention to you that, let's give a classical example. The federal government has made supplementary budget about 6 trillion naira. NNPC 2.1 final dividend is more than 35% of the the supplementary budget. But beyond that, so that will show you that the impact of this is going to have when that money comes to the Federation account. And like I said earlier, I looked at the figures that have been shared in the first 8 months of this year. Only about 8.73 trillion naira have been shared to the three tiers of government. NNPC is going to pay a tax of 2.6 trillion naira, pay a final dividend of 2.1 trillion naira, and an earlier interim dividend of 0.5 trillion. And bear in mind that NNPC, whatever dividend they pay goes to 2 organs of government. One, Federal Ministry of Finance Incorporated, and Ministry of Petroleum Incorporated. So, and they own NNPC Limited 50-50%. So it's all go back to the entire national treasury. And that simply means it will dovetail into the federation account, which will be shared to the three tiers of government. And that will cushion the kind of financial stress that the governments at the different levels are going through.
You actually started by letting us in on the consistent losses. Perhaps let's touch more on that again. Your thoughts on NNPC transiting from consistent losses to record profits in the last 40-something years or so. So what factors might be contributing to this turnaround?
What I would say is that based on my knowledge of economics is that the management of NNPC would have, one, reduced or shut out, eliminated the loss-making arms of the organization. They would have instilled some level of performance-based in different arms of NNPC. What I mean by that, you have the different subsidiaries of NNPC, because what we're talking about is a consolidated report of NNPC. You have NNPC Trading, you have NNPC Retail, you have NEPL, all of them are subsidiaries of NNPC. So it then means that some of them were loss leaders. And what they have done is institutionalize some performance reporting standards, and obviously those standards are monitored. And they have also escalated their level of reporting, that now do you have audited financial statements from NNPC. For years, we are not having audited financial statements from NNPC. So I think NNPC being an incorporated company, like what we have now, NNPC Limited, unlike what you have Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, when it was a corporation, and then there was no level of accountability. Now, what has been brought to bear are the standards that are applicable to private sector enterprises in terms of performance-based board oversight functions, budgeting, and then appraisals that actually measure performance against targets. And I believe those are the factors that would have were brought to bear that made the company to turn the corner. And then, like I said, for you to turn a company from a loss-making entity to a profit-making entity, you also have to identify loss leaders and eliminate them, unless they are contributing positively to other aspects of the business. And once you do that, you also make sure you measure each arm of the business based on performance standards. And I think those things have been institutionalized, and which is why you are seeing consistency in terms of their profitability. And we are seeing a steady growth in their profitability over these past few years since they turned the corner. Now,
let's take this, if we can chew on this before you leave, and it has to do with the exclusive by the cable newspapers about subsidies still being paid. On the one hand, as we're celebrating the gains from the NNPC, it seems that they will be asked to let go some of the monies. So what impact could the projected 6.884 trillion naira subsidy bill have on Nigeria's economy by the end of 2024?
Suleiman, I'll start by saying that I've said this severally in your studio at different programs, that subsidy was still there. And the very simple that happened was that by the time subsidy was removed, it was effectively eliminated at that point. But there was a shift in exchange rate from about 750 naira to $1 to about 1,500 naira to $1 today. And that shift in exchange then meant that the landing cost of petroleum products had actually moved back to being above the pump price. And there was a limit to the extent that the government could pass on the variation in the landing cost. So the government had to absorb that. And NNPC, being the major importer of petroleum products in the country, had to absorb it temporarily for the government. The key thing that was going to happen is that the federation account will have to bear whatever portion that NNPC is unable to write off or to offset from its dividend. So if you're going to have about 6 trillion naira subsidy payment, it then means that allocation that will go to 3 tiers of government will be at some point deducted at source to pay NNPC. Otherwise, NNPC will be dissipating its financial resources on subsidizing petrol to the 3 tiers for the country's consumption. So I think what we should see is that subsequent months, once the amount that NNPC is going to apply from its dividend payment is exhausted, then the federation account will have to make provision for the amount that be deducted before allocations are shared to the 3 tiers of government.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your time, Johnson Chukwu, CEO, Carry Asset Management. Thank you for being with us on Newsline.